So, you're moving to Chicago, but you have no idea where you should look for an apartment or what you should look out for. I have lived here since January of 2023, and I've picked up a thing or two, so I thought I'd share 7 quick tips. These are all my opinions, so take them with a grain of salt if you want. None of the things I'll mention are absolutely groundbreaking revelations about the city or city life in general, but for those uninitiated to Chicago or uninitiated to living in a large city, it might help give some general guidance. And this advice is targeted primarily toward young professionals looking for apartments, but anyone is welcome. So, tip number 1, don't live in the loop. The loop is the central hub of the city, so one might assume that this is the most desirable place to live. However, the loop consists of primarily office buildings, so after 6 p.m. or so on weekdays, it'll be deserted, and on the weekends, it'll be filled with tourists and people going to see shows at the theaters. Basically, no one lives in the loop itself. Tip number 2, find a neighborhood that fits your vibe. Each neighborhood has a certain feel, and some may predominantly consist of people within a certain age range or stage of life. And if you don't fit that general archetype, it's by no means wrong to live there, and the general archetype of each neighborhood probably only applies to some percentage of its residents. But for example, if you're 22 years old and looking to make new friends in Chicago, there might be better options than moving into a part of town with predominantly young families. One thing to note, and this is completely my opinion, some may disagree, you should seek out a neighborhood with the vibe that you actually have, not a vibe that sounds cool to have. If you're not a Gold Coast sort of person right now, living in Gold Coast probably won't make you one. I will have additional videos explaining individual neighborhoods, so stay tuned on my channel for those. Tip number 3, get an apartment that is close to the things you will be doing 80% of the time. You shouldn't be looking for an apartment that is near the sort of things you would like to spend 80% of your time doing. For example, if you like going out to the clubs, River North might sound great. But if in reality you only end up going clubbing once a month, maybe that shouldn't be your primary decision making criteria. Additionally, in the winter, you won't want to make special trips that aren't obligations. For example, if you want to get out of the house and do some casual shopping, and it takes a bus or a train to get to the stores in a different neighborhood, you likely won't end up actually going. But if it's down the street, you'll probably find yourself stopping in. Tip number 4, don't get sucked into one of those brand new plate glass fancy doorman buildings with extensive amenities, unless that's very clearly your vibe and not your vision board version of yourself. This one is very near and dear to my heart because I signed an 18-month lease at one of these after touring only 2 other apartment buildings. These buildings make it very easy to rent there with a very streamlined touring and application process. And they might even make it seem like the units are going quickly, but this is all just good marketing. The rents of these buildings are significantly higher than the buildings most Chicago residents live at. For example, the cheapest studio apartments at some of these buildings are over $2,200 a month in some areas. If you tell any longer term resident that you spend that much on a studio each month, they will laugh you out of the room. And weird side note, in a lot of these overpriced buildings, people pay up for all the amenities like a lounge area or work from home space, but these never actually get used all that much. Tip number 5, get rid of your car unless you have a very specific reason to have it. CTA, walking, and my favorite, biking, are all good options within most neighborhoods. If, for example, you work in the suburbs or you will be frequently visiting family outside the city, then by all means keep it. But if your justification is, oh, I don't know, I'd like to keep it just in case, you're fine to sell it. In some neighborhoods, parking can run $200 plus a month, not to mention all the other costs of owning a car. And parking really varies by building, so taking that criteria out of the equation when searching for rentals may make things easier. But again, this all depends on your neighborhood and your lifestyle. Tip number 6, pay attention to noise. People assume that, oh, Chicago is loud, cities are loud, that's just how it is. But this isn't necessarily true. Some quieter areas of the city can feel like a small town in terms of noise. But it's all up to you to decide how important noise is. Specifically, the three things to look out for are the L or elevated train lines, fire stations, and main thoroughfare roads. Noise pollution will become quite clear when you see a very unexpectedly cheap apartment for sale on the internet, and upon looking on Google Maps, you see that it is directly adjacent to a train line. Those things are very loud. Tip number 7. Understand the context of internet reviews for apartment buildings, like the reviews you see on Google, for example. Buildings change management companies all the time, and sometimes units get renovated and so on. So, if you see reviews from 6 years ago talking about leaky sinks, this feedback may no longer be valid. Additionally, some buildings actually work to inflate their ratings, meaning they'll provide incentives like free food to residents if they provide a 5-star review. Also, remember that the vast majority of people that provide reviews online, especially for residential buildings, are those who had either an exceptional or a terrible experience. But as a general rule, if there's an extremely overwhelming negative consensus within the past few years on a given building, maybe keep that in mind during your search. So, these are my 7 tips. Post a comment down below if you disagree with them or if you have other tips to share. Thank you for watching.